Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's the Historical Gamer once again, and we're going to be playing Commander the Great War again. As you can see here, we are in January of 1916. The Western Front is a little bit different than historical. Belgium is pretty much all conquered, just as it was historically. We've advanced a little bit further into Paris. We've also had a little bit more success in the south, driving out of Germany and away from Metz and Strasbourg and toward Dijon. The French have lost pretty heavily the last few turns in terms of manpower and units, so they've been struggling there. But meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, things are pretty grim. Berlin is on the front line of a over a year-long Russian offensive here, which has been seriously threatening the German capital and is somewhat concerning. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Russians have, or on the far Eastern Front, I guess, the Russians have been pretty reluctant to do much of anything to stem our successes with the Ottomans. The Italian front is stagnant. The Serbian front has just wrapped up. The Serbians have been defeated, and Bulgaria just joined the war on the side of the Central Powers. So all in all, things are going well everywhere except for the Eastern Front along Berlin, or at least as well as could probably be expected, pretty close to historically the way things were going, if not in exact geographic locations, then at least in character. You can see here the French continuing to launch attacks along the front line. They've had quite a bit of offensives here early in the year, so kind of like a early winter offensive. But well, that's interesting. They just shifted a small garrison to the front line near Dijon. That's relatively encouraging. That means they must not have a whole lot of troops in reserve if they've got basically a city garrison on their front line. Meanwhile, the Russians have broken out of the encirclement, but in doing so, probably isolated and doomed their full infantry unit to destruction. A limited Allied offensive here on the Italian front, a little bit concerning there, and it's always nice when the enemy shuffles troops out of the front there, like they just did with that armored car unit, and replaces them with less than full-strength units. To me, that tells me that the situation on that front line is good as well, and that the enemy probably is pretty low in terms of fresh troops. But you can see here the Soviets continuing their offensive near Berlin, driving back that Austrian unit, and further expanding the gap around, I guess, to the west of Berlin. Also badly damaging and, well, I guess destroying that Austrian unit in front of Berlin. So, yeah, things are not going well. I really could use like 3 or 4 fresh full-size units, but I don't have those anywhere. Hopefully the fact that the unit in Berlin hasn't been engaged at all will help to keep things. Maybe it'll no longer be disorganized. Maybe it can reform a bit. That's my hope, anyway. Let's see here. The Russians are also bled down pretty badly. I mean, you can see none of their units are at full strength. The problem is none of my units are at full strength. And I continue to forget about that submarine in the Mediterranean. We need some of those supply ships to get in badly. We need industrial points and reinforcements. So, let's see. So that's what I don't get. Why can't you move and attack enemy submarines the same turn? Why do they have to be adjacent to you? Apparently submarines can't attack submarines. I'm going to switch these 2 units. It's a smaller unit in Berlin, but it's in trenches and it's not disorganized, so that'll hopefully lend some strength to the defensive. Meanwhile, this unit here on the front in France is badly damaged. We're going to swap it out for a fresh, smaller unit, but a fresh unit. Kind of shuffling units out of the front, which the French did in the south, and interestingly enough, they replaced it with a smaller unit, so that's always good to see. rail that unit to Berlin. It's not full strength, but it'll have to do. Shifting some reinforcements to the eastern front from Berlin, or not from, but to the Berlin area. We could rail this unit, pulling out some of our artillery from the western front. I don't know if units recover faster in cities or not. If they do, it might be worth pulling that guy back. So we're going to kind of try and shorten our front line and withdraw out of this kind of, I don't know if it's really an exposed position, but we're using more units along the front there than we need to, and with the situation in the east, I need to pull my troops back kind of as much as possible to try and conserve how many troops I need along the front in the west, which then should allow me to shift more troops to the east to deal with the Russians and protect Berlin. So we're kind of sacrificing some successes in the west by shifting troops to the east. So we'll see how that plays out. Meanwhile, if we go to the Caucasus, we can see that the Russians have basically sacrificed their unit near Stavropol by pulling this garrison unit out. I don't think there's much of a likelihood of that Russian unit escaping this pincer. And now that they are surrounded, I'm basically just going to attempt to attack and weaken them. You know, I am losing some casualties here, but the goal is more to prevent them from being able to break out. Although, maybe I should have waited for... I took a lot more casualties than I intended. In softening them up, so maybe I should have waited for the bonus of them being without supply, which won't happen until next turn. Meanwhile, on the eastern side of things, we're still advancing, relatively unopposed. So yeah, the situation in the Caucasus continues to be beneficial to the Ottoman Empire. The Reconquista, however it's pronounced, of Ottoman provinces, which were at one time held in the Crimea and lost. Meanwhile, shifting some troops here to Vienna to defend what is a very exposed front here. It's going to be a very multi-ethnic front with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is multi-ethnic as that is, you know, with all those dozens and dozens of different ethnicities just within that empire, plus now the Bulgarians and the Turkish all fighting along the same front. Looks like about 10 terms for Romania to come into the war, so I don't know if we want to abandon the front here entirely. I just don't have enough rail power to get everybody, to shift everybody in the front quick enough, which is annoying. Bulgaria at least brings some additional manpower, so we can go ahead and purchase a couple more units, which should be able to be placed along the front here. The Ottomans also have a full size, or a couple of units here. I don't think there's much of a risk of the British pulling a Gallipoli. So we pulled out our infantry unit in Constantinople and now a garrison unit near Constantinople. But that might be just about it. We'll go ahead and reinforce these guys here as much as we can. So there, we've got our troops back up to full strength, which is good, but still heavily outnumbered. And it just seems like the Russians, I know I've been saying this a while, it just seems like the Russians just keep attacking. There's just no way to stop them. So the Italians moved a battleship into Trieste. Doesn't look like anyone gets a bonus for being close to their home waters in this area because everything is so close, but I don't want the Italians to destroy my own battle fleet there with their bigger battleships, so I'll have to stop bombarding Trieste now that the Italians have put a battleship there. And, yeah. German boats in Italy. Okay, so now that German troops have stepped foot in Italy, Italy is now putting pressure on the Allies to send support, which is good, I think. You know, anything to pull Allied troops away and towards, anything to pull Allied troops away from other fronts toward a front where we're having some success is a good thing. Also, the Italian front is such a narrow corridor in front that it should be more easy to have success there. Although the French have troops, I don't know if I planned that out all that well. There's a 2-unit gap now between that French unit and they could probably, I don't know if it'd be plausible, I don't know if it'd be feasible for them to swing around behind us, but we feel vulnerable. I feel vulnerable. Let's see here. I don't know if I really want to attack anywhere on the Western Front. Just kind of hunker in and maybe send some reinforcements east. I'm sending a lot of artillery east because if I'm not launching any attacks on the Western Front, I don't really need that artillery there as much. Hopefully we can destroy those British submarines in the Baltic here in the next turn. I don't know if I want to spend money on more reinforcements. I need them, but my guess is I'm going to need the money to reinforce our casualties more so than I'm going to need them to get new units. You know, Berlin might not last the 4 turns it takes to get a new unit, but those points could help prevent Berlin from falling next turn. Yeah, what the hell. Can't really do anything else here. Romania is such a weird country. They've got a really long border. It's going to be a nightmare to fight when they come into this war. One thing I think I've been doing a really poor job of is not intercepting Allied convoys. They get a lot of industrial points through the convoy system, and I really haven't been doing anything with that. Now, the plus side is it lowers the likelihood of the United States entering the war on the Allied side, or on the Entente side, or however you pronounce that. But it does make things... the hell was that noise? It does make things more difficult, I think. You know, obviously when the enemy just has all the industrial points they need. Pretty substantial French offensives here in 1916. You can see there the British are getting involved. We're going to need to pull that unit out along the border or it will be destroyed for sure. 2 British units on the Western Front. That's the most I've seen in a while. Meanwhile, the Russians continue their retreat away from Stavropol or whatever it's called. Wonder if the camera movement toward Rostov means the Russians might be bringing some troops in. Again, I think the biggest risk is the Russians using reinforcements in the Caucasus. I don't think they're going to have the rail power necessary to transfer a large number of troops from the Western Front. Well, not really. I guess their Western Front, the German Eastern Front, to the Caucasus, as much as I would like them to. And we're into February. Let's see what happens here along the Eastern Front. See if the Soviets continue their reckless advance with all of their units being disrupted in some... See, they're disrupted, they move, they attack, and they destroy us. And meanwhile, our troops can't get undisrupted. Now they're trying to cut off Berlin. They're trying to swing around Berlin and cut us off into some kind of pocket in the Stettin-Berlin pocket. God damn it. Oh, things are going poorly. I sound like a whine. Oh, look there, they can afford to reinforce everything because apparently the Russians have unlimited industrial supply. Good God. More submarine warfare. Merchant ships, we badly need you. So there's the Russian troop. Looks like they reinforced those guys despite them being surrounded. So that doesn't make much sense to me, but hey, we took the city of Stavropol and destroyed an entire Russian army there, which is very good. Good, very good. Meanwhile, we're chasing down this retreating Russian unit and continuing the advance in the Caucasus. We have lost some casualties, though, so that may pose a threat. These stubborn Russians are providing more of a challenge than I would like. But this other Russian city here in the Caucasus is now surrounded. So the advance continues toward Tsaristan, which, again, I think is Stalingrad. I think. I could probably, research it, but... So I want to pull this unit back here in the Sinai. British are kind of ganging up on it. I don't know. I don't know if I really want to... Yeah, I don't really want to advance further in the Sinai. I think I'll just pull back and let the British put one unit into the center there again. Don't want to risk getting myself cut off there. And here you see along the front in Romania, which doesn't really exist yet. We're starting to build up a little bit of a line there with Bulgarian and Ottoman troops and probably Austrian troops before too long. I'm trying to build up a force around... I guess I'm kind of building up multiple forces. One around Vienna, which I think is going to try and launch a counterattack to maybe threaten the Russian rear near Berlin. The problem I think we're going to run into is I don't know how thin the Russians really are near the eastern front where Berlin is, or whether they're, if they're thin there, it'll be successful. If they're not, this could be a pretty disastrous result here. Meanwhile, we had a small breakthrough on the front in Italy. It looks like the British have plugged the hole with an armored car unit. So there's that. And trying to reduce this Italian unit here. Just trying to win a war of attrition, really, on the Italian front, where we do have some advantages. We just, unfortunately, can't use our naval advantage there anymore, as, the enemy doesn't... They don't seem to... their naval forces are in the way, essentially. You can see there we're bombarding the enemy. There we go. So didn't really want to pull the garrison out of Hanover, but we just destroyed a Russian unit there, so that's a positive, right? And now we can, I don't know if this is wise, cut off this Russian unit here, which was trying to encircle Berlin. So I think we'll probably just let that sit there. I don't know if the Russians have enough strength to relieve that force or not. Hopefully not. So there's that. So one Russian unit destroyed, another Russian unit cut off. Some positives, hopefully. We'll see if we can maintain them through this turn, but it's better than what it looked like 2 minutes ago, I guess you could say. And we'll pull that unit off the front. I don't really have any one to... I guess I can... There we go. Alright, so we'll pull those guys out. I don't have any money left to reinforce anybody. Yeah, so some strategic realignment. We can use the cavalry here to drive forward to try and launch a counterattack from the south to retake Prague. Doesn't look like there's any Russian units around there, so that's a good thing. I don't know if we want to try and launch a full-scale, counterattack. There's a Russian cavalry unit. So we kind of move these forces up to the front. I'm not seeing a whole lot of Russian units, so that's mildly encouraging, but maybe I should have waited till more forces were redeployed. I don't know. Again, I don't want to pull too many troops away from the Romanian border because it says they're going to be at war with us soon. So we got to be a little bit careful with that. I would love to cut the Allied troops off at Trieste. I think they have naval supply, so I don't know if they'll be totally surrounded. I'm not quite sure how that works, but if I could drive that British armored unit back and take Venice, I'd cut off 3 or 4 enemy units there in a nice little pocket, but not sure how that'd work out. So, huzzah, we successfully destroyed a British submarine unit. The Royal Navy is really struggling at this point. They've lost, 2 or 3 battleships, several cruisers. I know we've lost a few cruisers ourselves, but this war has not gone well. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, while the Russians are strong and have been threatening us, I have to believe they're near exhaustion. You can see there almost all of their units are beat up. Some of them are red, which means they're, what do you call it, disorganized, and then yellow means kind of suppressed. We just drove 1 more unit back, so that's good. If we look at the Caucasus, the front is still looking solid, although you can see there our advances come at the price of organization. Our units are starting to get heavily disorganized. They started to take some pretty substantial casualties last turn. So there we drove back a Russian unit, we cut off a Russian unit, and we destroyed a Russian unit. So hopefully the Russians don't come back too strong and angry, because they've only got 2 units along this front which are not disorganized in some way. Looks like they've only got 2 units along the Eastern Front that are at full strength. And just waiting to see what the AI does here on its turn. You can see the French have launched an attack on the Western Front, which is threatening to break through our line there, which is definitely not good. Our unit, which is caught in somewhat of a pincer on the Western Front's also in trouble. It's now disorganized. And the French continue their attacks. Definitely some pressure there. I'm not too worried. I could bend my line back toward Brussels again if I need to. On the Caucasus front, what are the Russians going to do here now that we destroyed their full Russian army unit, and have badly mauled their other garrison unit, which they sent to the region? I guess we'll see what they do. I've got to think, even if I'm not having a tremendous military impact by all of these victories against the Russians in the Caucasus, that I'm having some kind of political effect. I don't know how the game simulates politics, but I'm hoping the Russians are, they have some kind of mechanic for dealing with discord in the Russian Empire. So seeing more and more armored cars making me a little bit nervous. I know there was 1 armored car unit to start the war, but if the enemy starts getting tanks, our defensive advantages could start to become less apparent, and the last thing I need to deal with is a resurgent Western allies on the offensive, at least until I deal with the Russians here in the east. So the Russians have apparently taken the cue of us bringing forces to bear on their front, and at least, looks like they're launching an offensive against our troops here in the south, or at least, I don't know, maneuvering to surround them maybe? Good lord. Do the Russians ever run out of people? Seriously. Come on. Stop attacking me. Couldn't you, just pause for a little bit? Stop attacking. Just take a breather. You probably need it. Your troops probably are exhausted. Good thing is I don't see anything around Prague, so. I've got 1 infantry unit. They just railed into Breslau. I probably shouldn't have moved that cavalry unit forward so soon. I should have waited till I had those other infantry units up there as well, ready to support, and then that way it would be more of a surprise, I suppose. Or maybe not a surprise, but they'd have more to respond to. If I come in piecemeal, it's going to make things more difficult, but I guess we'll see. Yeah, the winter season has passed, so we're into the spring of 1916. See there's the Russian unit. All right, so we just destroyed an entire Russian army unit there in front of Berlin. Damn it. Well, we've severely damaged another Russian unit cut off behind Berlin. And our artillery is having... Well, they don't have enough artillery apparently, but... Destroyed that Russian submarine. And then use the Navy. You know, the one thing that strikes me as odd is that naval bombardment uses less artillery ammunition than conventional bombardment. I guess that makes some sense in that, you know, they don't use nearly as many shells, but they're heavy caliber shells, so you would think they would be more expensive and would end up being roughly the same. I'm not sure. A little bit of a strategic realignment here in the western front. Digging in here on the eastern front. No ammunition to bombard this enemy unit here. So the Italian front's getting a little bit more crowded in terms of manpower. But that was a really nice exchange, 9-1 in terms of casualties there. Moving our infantry forward toward Prague. We can move our cavalry toward the Russian rear at Leipzig. Unfortunately, they can't attack a Duggan enemy unit very effectively, but we've retaken Prague, and I would think we're posing a threat to the Russian rear. Meanwhile, here the Russians are they're in bigger, I guess, more strength than I had hoped. So we're going to kind of shift our line a bit. That didn't go as planned. I'd hoped to, you know, normally if you attack cavalry in the open, you can inflict pretty heavy casualties on them. It was not the case there. Maybe a little too aggressive at this point. So we can see the Romanians are coming into war with us within about 10 turns. Maybe rail some reinforcements here. Some artillery should probably be useful. Bring in some extra infantry to the Italian front now that it seems the Allies are deploying substantial forces there. And keep slowly moving the rest of our troops up. So all in all, there we go. Didn't destroy that unit, but badly crippled that French unit to barely any loss of our own, so kind of giving the AI a taste of its own medicine, which is what I always like to see. Meanwhile, jumping to the Caucasus front, we continue to drive the Russians back. And destroyed that garrison unit now, so the Russians have now lost something like 6 or 7 garrison unit and 1 full infantry unit. Another city garrison about to be reduced or badly damaged. As we continue our advance, unit here in whatever this city name is cut off and now destroyed, so we've taken another Russian city. The question at this point is where we go in the Caucasus, but we'll get to that shortly. Alright, I think I'm going to make this video a little bit longer than the previous ones, just so I can wrap up what I've already got pre-recorded, and then the further follow-on videos will go ahead and, I guess, start off where I've left off. You know, I haven't actually been playing the game for a month or so. I've just been using pre-recorded footage that I played a whole bunch when the game first came out. So keep that in mind here. You know, we'll see a little bit more fresh take, hopefully, shortly. I've just been, as I said, kind of narrating over what I've already done. But kind of falling back here on the Western Front, am concerned a little bit about that one unit on the south, but I guess we'll see what happens. Meanwhile, on the north, hopefully, I could really use upgrading these troops. These guys, I just don't have a whole lot of, resources. I need to make sure I'm smart with the units I upgrade. So I just upgraded 3 units there, probably the 3 most likely to face French attacks. So hopefully the Russians don't do anything too aggressive. That's the one thing I've been discounting. I haven't really been upgrading my troops a whole lot because I haven't had the money, the resources, the time, or anything like that. I've been so pressed up against it. I wonder if the Soviets maybe haven't upgraded their troops quite a bit, and maybe that's why they're having more success than I thought is realistic. So I guess we'll see there. I don't know if I've got enough troops here coming up. I've got the 1 cavalry unit and the 2 infantry units coming up toward Prague. I doubt that's enough to break the Russian offensive, but again, without seeing too much of what the enemy has, it would seem they're going to have to pull troops from somewhere to stop me, although they certainly seem to have troops in reserve in spades there on the eastern portion of the Eastern Front, as they've now started launching attacks against the Austrians. This French armored car unit here has been devastated. I'm glad to see the French and the British are diverting troops to help the Italians. To me, that's it's always a plus to see when you've got 2 full French army, or is it 3 full French army units here? There's almost no Italian army left. It looks like there's 3 Italian units. 2 of them are garrisons. 1 of them is a full-size infantry unit. They've lost pretty heavily, so that's good to see. Not good to see the fact that the Russians never seem to run out of manpower. We confront them with 6 divisions or 6 corps or whatever the heck those things are, and they just throw right back at us from the direction of Przemysl and Krakow and all of that, almost like they were just sitting there waiting. But I guess we'll see what happens here in this turn. So AI is thinking. They're continuing to attack along the Western Front. Surprising how aggressive they've been there. They move forward, but they haven't actually attacked along the Calais region. So there's a little bit more flexibility in the front, I would say, so far than historically happened. But at the same time, it's still pretty static along most of the front. So it seems pretty realistic in terms of its rendition of the Eastern Front. Western Front, historic Western Front, that is. I would imagine they're going to pull that armored car unit out, maybe swap it with the British one. Anytime. The good thing about this is, when the enemy has to build new units like armored cars, that uses up their manpower too. So while, they might not be using as much manpower, it definitely uses industry points. So the more of that I can destroy, the better, because then that means they'll have less to put into more useful units like infantry. I don't put too much value in armored cars. There are some units in this game that I just don't think I've seen be all that valuable. Like there's artillery, heavy artillery that moves by the rails. Maybe they're really good at softening up enemy infantry. That's certainly possible. But to me, it just doesn't seem like the way I play that they have too much value as the Soviets continue to attack. Attack. Can you please just fall back, deal with the force around, threatening Leipzig in your rear, and stop attacking everywhere at all times? Look, they're attacking along the Berlin front. They're attacking along the Austrian front. They're attacking everywhere. And it seems like every time the Soviets attack, they, at worst, inflict a 1-to-1 casualty ratio. And I know I'm harping on that, but it really bugs me because it doesn't seem accurate at all. There they move in behind my cavalry and cut off the cavalry unit that I probably advanced too rapidly. Probably a little foolish of me to advance as quickly as I did. The troops near Berlin I don't know if they're trying to get out of their encirclement, but all they did was move in behind Berlin without any supplies. That's not going to be too difficult to deal with. Let's see here. Still waiting on the AI to process some of its turns. Why didn't that merchant go into the other port? There was one available right there. I need those supplies badly. So we've Austria's developed steel helmets. Germany's developed poison gas, it looks like. Maybe a little bit late. We're in March of 16. The French, interestingly enough, did not withdraw that armored car unit. They've got a half-strength unit along the coast. I feel like I could cut those troops off in trees so easily, but they're also two full-size French infantry units, so I doubt they'd be too. I'd cut them off and they'd probably break right out. I don't know if I'd have to shorten my line. I don't really have the troops to do it, but it sure is tempting. So why don't we do that? There we go. We finished that unit off without loss. Advanced into the breach. And shifted some troops around. We can go ahead and bombard that British armored car unit. I don't know, because they do control the sea lanes, if cutting them off would do anything, but if I could take Venice, that'd be nice too. If I had just a few more troops, I feel like I could do so much on the eastern, or on the, not eastern front, but on the Italian front. Alright, so limited success there. Just destroyed a French unit. Maybe it'll cause them to pull some troops out of their front line. Meanwhile, we did pull back in Flanders, but should be entrenching here before too long. And this cavalry unit's cut off, so we'll relieve it there with these troops. No longer should be in danger of being surrounded. But there, again, the French near Prague are just defending like furies. So we did this, and by advancing here, we've cut off this Russian unit. Now, I'm under no illusions. This Russian unit south of Hanover will certainly pull back and be back within supply before the turn is over, but it should at least prevent them from being too aggressive and attacking toward that artillery. Meanwhile, we finished the destruction of that Russian unit there, so damn. This German unit here in Stettin is in serious trouble. So we'll go ahead and reinforce it and then upgrade it as well. Hopefully that, coupled with the naval bombardment there of the Russian units around it, and then the Zeppelin bombardment will make the Russians ineffective enough so that they won't attack. Of course, they probably could just shift troops around, which the AI does really well. I will give the AI credit that. It's really smart with how it kind of moves troops around. So the Russians looks like they may be taking our offensive here in the Caucasus a little bit more seriously. They've got another full-size infantry unit, this time near Rostov at the head of the Caucasus. You can see here it doesn't look like Tsaristan has anything in it, though. So we might be able to take that next turn, unless the Soviets move some troops there. I don't know. At this point, we've reached the head of the Caucasus region. I don't know what we want to do. This is the part where Russia starts getting so vast. It's like, do we just start advancing up these cities and these rail lines into the heart of Russia and maybe threaten Moscow somehow? I mean, we're so far away. I guess we can shift north and maybe leave one garrison unit in Azorkram or whatever it's called. But this is where we're starting to get into kind of some deep and difficult tactical or strategic situations. We want to definitely reduce that Soviet unit around Rostov. We certainly want to take Tsaristan, which I believe is Stalingrad. We can see here as we zoom out, this is a map I haven't shown you yet, the Central Powers are struggling in the center, but doing extremely good on the peripherals, like in the Caucasus region. The Russians just have so many men. Look at this. The Austrian front, they just have so many bad guys. Just seemingly endless hordes of men. Can't you move some of these guys away from here? Ugh. I'm just going to have to pull back. I mean, they're never going to end. We finally get some more reinforcements with Bulgaria joining the war. We defeat Serbia, and now we've got to deal with this. So, yeah. We retook Prague momentarily and then lost it right back, probably because we were way too aggressive about it. We certainly could have held it if we waited for those 2 infantry units. If we waited 1 turn, we could have held it. But, yeah. Looks like the Portuguese are going to come to the war in about 10 turns as well. I don't know what they're really going to bring to the party. Just kind of leaving these troops along the front here. I don't want to leave Bulgaria too exposed. We don't want to leave Sofia exposed, but we can transfer von Hollendorf, the Austrian commander, here. And, yeah, we've emptied out Serbia. We got a garrison unit. We can move, I guess. It's still 10 more turns. We can always shift them back. And, yeah, what are we going to do? I don't know. What are we going to do? I don't know. The Italians kind of accomplished their main goal in the war in retaking Trieste, but they've been suffering mightily. I don't know if we've got any money to build this battleship back up. I feel like we could effectively challenge the Royal Navy at this point in time if we put to sea. I think the Royal Navy has 2 battleships left, which is what we have. But right now the Navy's doing important service in bombarding the Russians in the Baltic, at least keeping one of their units pretty much perpetually disorganized. 14-inch naval shells, or I think the Germans used 11 and 14-inch shells on their main battleships. The British used 12, 14, and 15, I want to say. They might actually think the British had some 13-inch shells as well. But anyway, yeah, so the Soviet front is kind of stabilized, but it's still in a very dangerous position. The Italian front is showing a little bit of opportunity. It's showing opportunity, but probably in a way that we can't exploit. But, yeah, I think that's just going to about do it here. I think I maybe have got like a minute or so left of footage. But just kind of reinforcing some units there, the submarine unit there, the cruiser unit. The Italians don't seem in any kind of eager mood to race out and meet us in naval combat. I'm kind of moving my battleship away, hoping maybe the Italians will come in and try and attack us real close to our port when we get that advantage. If we can destroy that Italian battleship, that would go a long way in basically making the Italian front much more manageable, because that front is so narrow and it borders the sea. So if you can have naval bombardment along the shore there, you're in tremendous shape. It was really helping us early in the campaign, help us destroy 2 infantry units in Trieste, badly damage a 3rd, and I think is going a long way toward making the Italian front one of the brighter areas. Meanwhile, the Eastern front near Berlin, still not too bright. But anyway, that's going to do it here today. I appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.